over $100,000 for information leading to the gunman who tried to kill Malala Yousafzai, a teenage campaigner for girls' education. OK, we're going to have a look at the stories that are making headlines around the world this morning, and we start off, as ever, with the Financial Times. It's always the Financial Times. It's leading with the collapse of that merger between Britain's BAE Systems and EADS. The paper notes the deal breaker was the conflicting interests of the three governments involved.
Now, in the Hong Kong Standard, 4 Nigerian farmers say leaks from Shell's pipelines have ruined their crops and fish farms. This is the paper's take on that case that's going to be discussed in The Hague today.
The New York Times reports China snubbing the International Monetary Fund and World Bank meetings in Japan. It blames the political spat between China and Japan over a group of islands in the East China Sea.
The freewheeling Prime Minister, our leader's Bob Dylan moment, is the headline in The Guardian. The paper suggests the PR team for David Cameron and his wife are copying Dylan's classic album cover.
The Daily Telegraph reports on a new study that suggests female charm is still the best way to clinch the deal.
And lastly, teeth grinding versus a balloon bursting. The Times features the most annoying sounds that really make your skin crawl, and for me, it's chalk on a blackboard.
Oh,
can't
dear.
do that. I just can't do that.
Eye-watering. OK, well, we're joined this morning by Rolake Akinkugbe, Head of Energy Research from EcoBank. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. Nice to see you. Let's kick off with the Financial Times then, and the big merger that didn't happen. There's so many disagreements, one wonders how it was even on the table in the first place.
Absolutely. I think, this was an opportunity to come up with a European rival to Boeing. But it's hard enough trying to merge two companies, but two companies that potentially have a variety of political and commercial interests. This was always going to be quite a challenge in the current climate.
Now, it's interesting because many of the people I spoke to from the day they announced this, kind of like, if this actually happens, we'll be very surprised. So no big surprise that it's not happened. But I wonder if it's dead in the water now, or whether they may try again at a later date.
I'm not necessarily sure, because with some of these big merger and acquisition deals, timing is everything. And in the current climate, you've got growing nationalism, you've got a volatile economic climate, regulators are stamping down a lot harder, and of course with spending cuts in the US, timing was a bit problematic. But I think now both BAE and EADS are going to have to try and speak to their shareholders and get them on side as well. And of course the issue of political control was one that the BAE shareholders weren't particularly thrilled about from the EADS side.
Now, moving on to our next story, it's a real David and Goliath story, isn't it? 4 Nigerian farmers from the Delta region have been propelled to the august body in The Hague, the International Criminal Court, where Friends of the Earth, isn't it? Friends of the Earth are driving forward this case against Shell. Now, this would set an enormous, massive precedent if they're successful.
It would do. It would set a precedent, but it's also worth bearing in mind that some of these sort of reputational risk issues have been a perennial theme in Nigeria's oil and gas industry that date back over many decades since oil was first pumped. It would set a serious precedent, and also for Shell, it's a PR issue, because earlier this year Shell was fined $5 billion by the Nigerian regulators for another oil spill in the region. I know international NGOs and activist groups are coming down heavy on many international oil companies. It's probably a case that's likely to drag on for a while, because it covers several different spills over the last decade.
Yeah, it talks about 2004, 2005 and 2007. So potentially, how damaging could this be for Shell, do you think?
It could be considerably damaging, but I suspect Shell would argue that some of the spills are not just caused by neglect or technical faults, but also by sabotage, oil militants and oil thieves in the region. So it's going to be quite a complex case to decipher. But I think Shell is going to try and prove that it did everything that it could to comply with environmental regulations.
Now, I know that you know the area, and we've had to deal with this issue, haven't we, of contamination and pollution in this part of Nigeria. pretty much ever since oil was discovered and started being pumped. How bad is it?
I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of barrels of oil being spilt since Nigeria first discovered oil in 1957. Part of the problem on the government side is enforcement of environmental regulations. These regulations exist, but in areas where there's a governance vacuum, actually checking the compliance of what oil companies are doing in the Delta region is a major problem.
Right, well, we'll keep an eye on that, that's for sure. It's very interesting. Let's have a look now at the global edition of today's New York Times, noting the fact, like many others have noted, that China's central bank governor and other leaders from China are not going to the IMF World Bank meetings in Tokyo. A clear snub, isn't it? It's all part, presumably, the spat between China and Japan.
Yeah, I mean, China is trying to send a very symbolic message by bringing what is essentially a political diplomatic issue into the economic sphere. I think it's going to be quite interesting because you can actually see a bit of softening on the Japanese side. The Japanese are now recognizing, yes, there is a dispute, perhaps to try and ward off the standoff with China. It would be a shame obviously for the Chinese officials, the top ones, not to turn up at what is a major global economic meeting. But it's also a reflection of the strong sentiments in China about this issue, which is obviously escalating on a daily basis.
I mean, this has been going on for weeks and weeks now, and in the meantime, companies like Toyota and Honda are saying our sales in China dropped 50% in September.
Yeah.
It's still having an impact on trade between the two. So when are we going to talk about this being resolved, and how will it be resolved?
I don't see any resolution in the short term. Obviously, China is wanting to exert some pressure, and Japan will start to recognize that some of its trade interests are increasingly being undermined in China as a result of this issue, but I don't see any short-term resolution at the moment.
OK, let's move on to The Guardian, and I suppose what is the biggest exercise in rebranding that we've come across this week. And this is, as you can see on the left, David Cameron, and on the right, Bob Dylan. And that's an album cover, which I must say I'm quite new to, but apparently this is quite sort of iconic.
Yeah, it is. I'm not sure David Cameron would want to be described as freewheeling, but it's essentially David Cameron reincarnated. I mean, on the back of the Tory party conference, is this all part of a grand PR scheme to make him more street acceptable to ordinary Britons across the board?
This is his birthday night out. He had a curry, didn't he?
Yes.
Sam flew in for it, and
absolutely.
It's all very cosy.
Yeah, and what I want to know, was that picture actually planned, or was this just a coincidence?
Well, the Guardian implies the Conservative Party's PR pod has been working very hard on this. It's one of those things we'll never know, will we?
No, they're both naturals, though, aren't they?
The Daily Telegraph, a female charm, still best way to clinch a deal. Now, you're a woman in business. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, I used my charm to get on screen today, but this is actually very vaguely reminiscent of the book. I don't know if you remember Honey Money, The Power of Erotic Capital, that was published by an LSE academic, a London School of Economics academic, suggesting that women could use their feminine charms to get ahead in the business world. And of course, feminists jumped on her straight away. I think the real issue I have there is this idea that you have to exploit your feminism in order to get ahead. And it doesn't lend itself to this idea of meritocracy.
I mean,
and
does
being
it
able
annoy
to
you
hold
when you read articles like this?
Not really. I mean, people are obviously quite entitled to their own opinions, and most women who are successful in business in whatever sphere of life know that they've worked hard to get where they are. But it's quite an interesting one, and it makes for some light humour.
And it's a debate that we're going to be having, I'm sure, forevermore. OK, what's the worst sound for you?
I think for me, and I love him, bless him, but I remember Boris Johnson during the Olympics, and in the stations we constantly heard the streaming of "get ahead of the games," and I think that for me actually became annoying. But for me, teeth grinding has to be number one, and I certainly agree.
Well, it's got teeth grinding as number one, but number 4 is Ed Miliband speaking.
I think that's,
which is interesting.
That's probably slightly unfair, because he did quite well at the Labour Party conference in terms of his rhetoric.
His One Nation speech went down very well with many, not with everybody, but
it did. But obviously, this is quite a subjective list, isn't it?
Indeed. You've got the furious whine of the dentist drill. That's an old favourite, and that's at number 7. And wonky shopping trolley, pull along luggage wheels. You know, the wheels that are not put on straight, and they take you all over the place.
And who comes up with the plop of a mobile phone falling in a toilet bowl? I mean, how often does that happen?
Number 22 is any overheard conversation that begins with the words "I'm on the train."
Yeah, I hear that one on a daily basis.
And the popping of a balloon. The popping of a balloon apparently is among the worst sounds. The crumple of your car's crumple zone. The low-level whirring of air conditioning. I think that can be quite reassuring, don't you?
Absolutely. You know, I hear that in hot climate all the time.
You like to know that that's working.
Absolutely.
DIY ringtones that tell you a bit too much about the phone's owner's personality. Yeah. What about the laughing baby, the chuckling
yes, that's
baby?
right.
Yeah.
That's foul. That's
those
foul.
ones who've got recorded voices saying things to them? You know, recorded voices of members of their family and things like
Or
that.
some of the train announcements, actually, that you hear going to work every day. Mind the gap.
We could go on and on,
Yeah.
couldn't
We
we?
certainly could. Rolake, thank you very much indeed for taking us through our paces this morning. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for being with us here at BBC World News.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Welcome to one of the most vibrant places on Earth. This